Ready to go live, go live. Yeah. Hello, 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 and welcome to our spiritual interactive panel. We appreciate you joining us to have a little sip. And tonight, our sip is going to be on spiritual DNA. For those who also want to know, our next sip, which is running across the bottom of our screen right now, will be on chakras. And sipping that cup of tea will be Patty Anastasia, Louis Grassi, and Raina Wilson, and myself. But tonight's tea experts are Benjamin Kibbe and Raina Wilson, as well as myself. So, spiritual DNA. I'm going to start with Benjamin telling us a little bit about himself and then his connection to the subject and what he would like to share with us. So, Benjamin, what the hell is spiritual DNA? Enlighten us.
Yeah, so my name is Benjamin. I've been studying occult for years. I'm a psychic, all over New Hampshire. I work in Salem in October. I'm a witchcraft priest and a student of life in spirituality and occult. And I've been part of different kinds of schools and things that have taught different things about what the connection between DNA and spirituality and how that is. And so how I started with all of it was really Kabbalah. And so with the deeper understandings of Kabbalah, it's an understanding and it's almost like an ancient form of how a human being is, set up and all the parts of their soul and their being and how they're connected to the divine and earth. And it's very complicated but it's really, my understanding of that, and the teaching was I did lots of things like something called a life activation that's supposed to activate certain, DNA codons spiritually in your energy system. Today, I don't view things in the same way. I feel like I'm a little more grounded in like reality, personal experience, and things like that too. But every person is spiritual. Every person has DNA. Every person has the potential to be whatever they want. And sometimes when people talk about spiritual DNA, they talk about how like maybe they are born with a psychic gene somewhere, or their family tends to be, more spiritual or connected to some kind of divine thing just through being born. And I just think that's a little crap. And I think more than anything, it's that everyone is born with the potential to be whatever they want to be. And there's a huge piece when it comes to being spiritual is everyone is psychic to a certain degree. Everyone has spiritual gifts, and it depends on their upbringing and their cultural and family conditions that really helps things certain develop. And whether that's like trauma on one side, where, a lot of the things where people say they have psychic gifts, it's because they had a survival mode in them that, they had to stay safe in situations. So their senses had to be a certain way. And so I believe in kind of that ultimate potential of a person, and kind of their experience through life shapes all of these things. And it's not based on just how you're born and who you're related to or where it comes from. Not that I don't believe in science and evolution and things like that, but when it comes to psychic stuff, maybe it's the extension of your senses, for example. There's other pieces like, in witchcraft, for example, I was born a witch. My mother was a witch, and I was, I have this sort of family line that, or part of my culture, part of my heritage, and I believe that to a certain level, but I'm also part of an initiatory witchcraft, group of Alexandrian witchcraft. And we don't care where you came from. We care if you're, a humble seeker and willing to learn. And initiation is what brings you in, which is something that is not based on your ethnicity at all. It's based on what you want and how much you want to dedicate yourself, to those things. And so I would say that I was psychic from a very young age, and I had spiritual gifts, and I've had certain, family traditions and things that were taught. And, it's a very long journey to understand where that came from and understand that like there's nothing, no religion, no tradition, no like special birthright that's ever going to make you more or less than another person than, when you're enter the world. The choices you make and the conditioning and the experiences that you have is really what shapes who you are. But on the other hand, I do believe that past lives are possible. So sometimes when they talk about spiritual DNA, it could be that maybe you do have past life memories. Maybe there is a returning that happens. And in that it's a memory but that's beyond DNA. That's maybe if you would talk about how DNA is maybe connected to the soul or the divine in some way. So that there's a connection there perhaps too, that I never shut the door on any of that. And I feel like I've had experiences in my life that felt like remembering, but that is also not really, attached to DNA and your physical body or your sex or anything like that, or your culture. And so, more than anything, it's kind of, where you come from and, your experiences that shape who you are to a certain level. And DNA is, on a spiritual level is sort of, the same for everyone. And there's nothing special that you need to be born into to be able to have that sort of spiritual connection and work and build and to your psychic and spiritual gifts. So, yeah.
Okay. And if you would like to contact Benjamin, you can do so at reclaimthyself.com. That is reclaimthyself.com. And do remember, whatever platform you're on, if you are following us on Benjamin's page, Benjamin will see your comments and will have to bring them to us, because I don't see the comments that they post on your page, Benjamin. Okay. So if anybody's got any questions there, you just have to, you can private chat me and let me know what the question is so I can bring it to the table. And outside of that, if you comment on any of the other platforms, I will see those comments and we can post them and make sure that they get answered. So we are now going to go. And, one of the things I usually say on this, and some of the stuff Benjamin said actually reminded me that I did not say on this at the beginning, that I always say on SIP, is we're here bringing very different spiritual perspectives. We may not always agree. We don't come on here to agree and go, hey, yeah, that's right. If all three of us said the exact same thing, two of you would be unnecessary and I'd be doing it alone. So I do want you to remember that this is about you touching your own psychic, your own intuitive spiritual knowing, and go, that feels correct to me. And yet somebody may say something else which feels like it's the total opposite or it's very different. And you may go, well, that feels correct to me. I want to remind people that one of the ways to spiritual enlightenment is walking the thin line of the sword of spiritual paradox. And something may be Benjamin's truth in this lifetime, and my truth in this lifetime may be polar opposite, but it is still both equally valid, because I'm not walking Benjamin's journey. Benjamin's not walking my journey. And it's one of the places where humans sometimes get kerfungled, so to speak, that they go, well, it's okay. There's a truth there somewhere, but there are really fairly few absolute truths that cover all 7 billion plus people. And it is the truth of who you are in this lifetime that you're looking for. And you will not resonate to something that is not on your pathway of truth as you are evolving as a soul. So hopefully that made sense. I'd like to throw that out. And now I'm going to toss it over to Raina. Raina, tell us a little bit about who you are. You can Again, if you want to get in touch with Benjamin, reclaimthyself.com. You can email Raina, who's coming up, at shine@thepearlsflame.com, or you can just go directly to her website. And I will now shut up and say, Raina, in the Raina world of reality, what the hell is spiritual DNA?
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here with y'all. And I appreciate particularly your message, Benjamin, about, just the openness and groundedness of your path. And I really, that resonates with me too, is the ground is very much a spiritual place as well, right? We all weave together heaven and earth, basically. But yeah, I'm Raina Wilson, and I'm a shamanic spiritual guide and somatic coach. My sharings today will be more like storytelling format, which is a way of a shamanic way and indigenous way of creating resonance and relationship and connection. And so I'll just around this topic of spiritual DNA. So just sharing my personal experience as I've come up in my life path. And so I was in shamanic initiation and mystic experience starting from a young age. And these experiences through my life were not induced by medicine or method, but were rather spontaneous. And these experiences were where a lot of my understanding on consciousness and creation comes from. I have a magnetic poetry that I created that's still up to this day. I did it some time ago, but what I put forward on it is what meaning delights the mystic experience. And so this is a lot of like what my path is on, and like evolving consciousness and spirit through direct experience, and not so much intellectual process, but a whole bodied integrated multidimensional process. And so even if I tried a method, right, spirit will still deliver a different direction for me. And so this is sort of my like left-handed wisdom path that I have been moved along in my spirituality and evolution and growth and learnings. And so I facilitate ecstatic experience with movement and breath, dream and sound. And, this is a way to open up opportunity for others to have spontaneous experience. And then we would then go ahead and also put that into meaningful, grounded context, which is just as important as the ecstatic experience. So I'm going to share today personal experiences and what led me to my understandings on spiritual DNA, which is that spiritual blueprint that shapes how we connect to divine knowing, wisdom, the mystery, and how we are embodied in our consciousness development. At young ages, I had near-death experience as well as walk-out, walk-in experiences. And in my NDE experience, it included receiving a soul braid with an essence of Kuan Yin, which I later understood in my adult years. And I also started around my middle school, like early teen ages. I started receiving transmissions from spirit on the Kabbalah, which started to direct my attention towards what to start learning about. I just later on, I also, as an adult, realized that was sort of my memory being pinged by spirit to start paying attention there and to understand that energy and structure. And, there are stories of shaman and mystics who, from, long ago, and they'll just go into trance and they'll travel via consciousness, and they'll come back with stories of descriptions of having seen what they called the world tree. And, this is the shape of consciousness that consciousness takes, which is it's like this toroidal donut shape that also spirals. It's basically like a electromagnetic field. And it looks like a tree as well, you know, with the trunk in the center that branches around, and also underneath with the roots of branches around, they spiral around. And so my understanding was that in my NDE and walk-in experiences, it served to like break me out of the spiral in order to understand the movement across the rungs rather than just linearly around it consecutively, as well as just be able to observe it from above or below the spiral, just so that I would have develop that consciousness skill of seeing beyond the conventional. And it also served to preserve my soul memory a bit more than what people say is typical. And what I've seen that has been noted about walk-ins is that that will be the case in order for that person to be able to serve their soul purpose without starting from scratch, basically, from, you know, having no memory. And so, you know, another one of my experiences over a decade ago is spirit moving my consciousness awareness to my oversoul from that vantage point or reference point. And from that reference point, it's like being on the trunk of the tree and seeing how all the souls split apart, you know, from the human expression of our souls. We can see how we split off singularly, but from that point, I was given the opportunity to understand and learn from spirit that not only do I have access to soul memory in my experience from past life incarnations of my soul, but also to essences of memories of other souls in my oversoul. And so, and one of those that wound up coming forward into my awareness was Miriam, Moses' sister, right? And so I understand that I carry an essence of understanding and consciousness from her lifetime as a prophetess, and her life lessons as part of my soul memory as well, just from having that reference point and connection, energetic connection that way. And these things that express itself, you know, in my lifetime, as I have learned and evolved and understood how to be in connection, right? Alongside with the seership that I also, that runs in my genetic lineages, my Pinoy and Nordic lineages particularly. And, you know, so this is just one example as spirit comes forward through and to me, how to understand consciousness in order for me to serve my life purpose here, right? As this guide, healer, teacher, counselor, sort of energy warrior to help spread shamanic service and help other people, facilitate them into understanding their way in a meaningful context for them, how their consciousness evolves and where their resonances and empowerments are with their soul. And so, yeah, and so this is how we like carry our lineages of consciousness through memories and experiences and spiritual and moral leanings from our past lives. And you'll recognize your spiritual lineages just from the callings and the resonances you feel in your own embodied experience. And I also just want to put forward that I also feel a responsibility to add on top of all this, that as a decolonizing, re-indigenizing, diasporic person of multiple lineages, and that given the culturally dominant constructs that have been brought forward by settler and colonizer mindsets that still persist today to perpetuate hyper-individualism, among things that I invite that the importance to create nurturing, collaborative, right relationship with the cultures that are not in your physical genetic makeup in order to receive their entrainment to your nervous system and your heart, right? In order to honor and embody those lineages authentically in a grounded way that that understands or dismantles the dominant constructs that might be harmful and prevent us from knowing our spiritual birthrights, right? And so that's my sharings on spiritual DNA at this point.
Oh, there we go. I found the unmute button. Again, that's Raina Wilson. You can email her at shine@thepearlsflame.com. That's shine@thepearlsflame.com. You can go to her website, which is thepearlsflame.com. Imagine that. And so I'm going to move into talking a little bit about my connection with this subject. And then what we're going to do is, remember, at any point you can ask questions, be part of the conversation. It's always more important, or I think it's always more valuable when you're part of the conversation, when you have a question. But if we have no questions when I finish, we may question each other. So be prepared to comment on things that stood out to you. So I think I come at this somewhat at a different angle than either of my fellow panelists. I was listening to some of what each of them was saying, but I always have looked at that this was important to me to figure out the spiritual DNA, because I knew from a young age that I definitely had things that passed down through my physiological DNA, but I also knew that there were things that seemed to have no reference, and yet it had a placement in me, and there was no finding it in my family tree. Trees seem to be a popular subject right now in this particular SIP. And I kind of look at it as I've always been fascinated by aspen groves, because you can see acres and acres and acres of aspens, but underneath they all share one root. And all that we see of the aspens are literally just different manifestations of the same tree that are coming up. And they're all aspens, but depending on whether they're on the higher slope, the lower slope, whether they get more sun, less sun, how many trees are how close to them, which way the wind blows, where storms came, where they were, they didn't all pop up at once. They create an individuality, but yet still have that same shared root. And that root goes as far as, if you get into a really, I used to live in Colorado. I did hiking out there through all of that area. And you can stand in the middle of an aspen grove and not see the end of the aspen trees as far as you look. And you can get pretty high up and just keep looking, and all you see is the aspens. I've always looked at cells as souls, as being cells in the body of God. For me, God, Goddess, Allah, Buddha, universe, the great pumpkin, I don't care what you call it. I always look at it and say, there is a source from which we spun out. There is a source from which the universe spun out. And if looking at us as cells in the body of God, or whatever term you like to use, that what we know about the human body is that every human body has cells, and in those cells are DNA. Like, you can go into any cell and they all have the DNA that showed up in this lifetime for that person. Sometimes more traits show up from the mother's side or the father's side or grandmother's side, or you're a throwback to great uncle, Emily, who you lived 5 generations ago, and you see a painting and you look just like him, whatever. And you go, oh my God, this is me reborn. Physical appearance does not necessarily mean that it was a reincarnational reborn, but it does show you how these traits become, some are very latent, some never come out, others will come out depending on the environment, which is part of what Benjamin was saying, what brings out, what makes the things happen. Just like in the aspirin things, they're all aspirins from the same root, but if one got a lot more sun and one had a lot more wind, they could look very different, depending on where they are. So when I look at spiritual DNA, I say, well, there's my soul, and my soul keeps coming back through all these lifetimes, both from the past life work that I have done with, at this point, I have been in practice for 34 years full-time doing this. And I think I did my first past life stuff late 70s. And I am actually just realized that I'm talking and I'm not changing. You can find out more about me at kevinrossemery.com, or you can email me at kevin@kevinrossemery.com. I make sure everybody else is up, and of course I forget my own. But with that said, I made the connection one day and, got that kind of confirmation that I get when I know I have stumbled upon a truth, is that spiritual DNA and physiological DNA entwine together as part of the core foundation of who we are to be in a lifetime. And through our spiritual DNA, we are choosing the lessons that we came in to do. We are highlighting the gifts, the talents, the challenges. Maybe we're here to rectify something that we didn't get to complete, or that we had a lesson and we didn't really learn the lesson. In fact, the lesson kind of learned us and went on its merry way. And we were kind of like, we die, we look and go, boy, that one didn't go the way it was supposed to, did it? I'm going to have to come back and do that one again. And so, not as a punishment. And I want to put that very clear here. And we've done lots of different SIPs. We've done SIPs on soul contracts, and we've done SIPs on reincarnation. And so some of the things I've said there are obviously going to weave in this, because I look at spiritual DNA as this is the actual holder that your oversoul has as its cell in the body of God, of what you as that unique cell's journey, that soul's journey. And it is going to have a DNA like nobody else's. It is going to be completely based on the lifetimes you've lived and how you've lived them and what form you've lived them in. We've had conversations on SIPs before where we've talked about, we can go in and out of human incarnation, and we can incarnate in other shared relatives that are living on other planets and other realities. So all of that makes up this unique spiritual DNA. And the part that's really important, or one of the parts that's really important to me, why I wanted to talk about spiritual DNA, is spiritual DNA oftentimes can slam up against some of what we have today when we start getting into cultural appropriation. And we look at it very limitedly at times of, well, your 23andMe or your ancestry.com didn't show any Native American, yet you have Native American things flowing out of your mouth like you don't, like there was no tomorrow. And everybody said, well, you're culturally appropriate. I never read a book, never met one. It was just flowing out of me. Well, that's because it was in your spiritual DNA that you came in to access a whole lifetime you had as a Native American. It just wasn't in your physical DNA line. And then it comes out and it goes, where does this all fit on this spectrum? And so when we kind of look at a spiritual DNA, now I mean, cultural appropriation absolutely exists. Do not hear that it doesn't. It does. And for 2,000 years, the abuse of cultures by religions and by colonizations and all that absolutely exists. And there are people who, because they come from a place of privilege in a lifetime, in that privilege may decide that they get to play fast and loose with other people's cultures in a disrespectful way. But I don't think that we can completely limit it on, is it in your bloodline? Some people are clearly called to a certain way of being, to a certain spirituality, to something that may have never existed in that DNA line of theirs. And so when we're looking at spiritual DNA, we're looking at, to me, a perfectly valid line or lineage of why in a lifetime you may be drawn to something. You may be very talented with something. You may be very gifted with something that just literally did not exist in your physical DNA. You were way out of, the bar. Now, I always think because, a long time ago, early when I started my current business doing this work, so 32 years ago, 34 years ago, somewhere in the first few years, I got completely immersed in Native American stuff because it called to me. In fact, I tried to run away from it. I tried to go, no, like you look at me, you don't think Native American. And yet in dreams, in psychic messages from other people, in experiences that were reaching out to me, I kept on getting pulled. And the more that I got pulled, the more I would be like saying things and doing things. And then, of course, because, I have spent a good part of that time, 18, 19 years, being a full body trance channel. The first group I ever channeled was the Native American Council of Grandmothers. I didn't even know they existed at the time. When they started channeling through me and giving all these messages for people who were like, oh my God, that's amazing. And and started looking at things. I was like, I don't have any Native training. I'm not a shaman in the Native American tradition. I've never learned anything. And yet, when I would work with very grounded medicine men and women, worked in multiple different tribes where I would show up, and the medicine men and women who were within the culture would talk to me and they're like, oh yeah, no, you got it. Like, you're like, I don't know where you got it from, but you're right in alignment. Like, people that have studied it don't get it the way you get it. And so I'd be like, okay, well, it just doing what comes naturally. Open up my mouth and vomit. Blah! Psychic information, words, thoughts, whatever, and they were there. I even went and taught at a Native American men's weekend that I was invited to. And I'm like, why are you inviting me to a Native American men's weekend to teach? But the elder that ran the weekend had heard me speak and felt like I had a very important message that the people that the people that attended needed to hear. And he said, you don't have to be Native to have something of value to say to people that are there studying the ways of native. Like, that's not how we function, which I find very interesting, because the senior kind of spiritual leadership of this group that did this, who were all full-blooded or close to full-blooded Native American, and were medicine men and women. And well, in this particular case, was all medicine men, though I did work with a fabulous medicine woman at another time period for quite a while, and did medicine wheels and did these things. And she just kept on saying, and if anybody said, why is he doing it? They'd be like, so much to learn. White man blindness, white man blindness. That's what she used to call it, white man blindness. Like, if you close your eyes and you hear him talk, you would not think he was a white man. White man blindness. And so it was a struggle. And I got my Native American, was gifted with a medicine name, which I wasn't searching, I wasn't looking, but it came to me, and it felt very correct. And it actually described things that had been going on in my life that the shaman did not know was going on in my life, had no way of knowing. He referred to me as the white wolf with blue eyes, not knowing I'd been showing up for a couple of years in people's dreams. And they'd say, you were in my dream to protect me, to help me, to save me. And I would say, oh, so, how did I appear? And I had kids and adults going, you were a white wolf with blue eyes. And I would look in your eyes and I would knew it was you, and you were keeping me safe, and you were driving things away. This guy knew none of that. And he goes and he does this sacred meditation and gifting to spirit and all this stuff, comes back and tells me my medicine name is Wolf Cloud, which I ended up stopped using because so many people were screaming cultural appropriation at me. And that's when I also dived deeper into spiritual DNA. I said, I really have to understand this. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I also think that there is white man blindness. Like, the white privilege definitely has been out of control. It exists. White fragility exists. I'm very active in some social justice organizations. I completely get it. I understand. I have clients, I have friends, I know people, because unless you come to close enough to understand that I'm part of the LGBTQIA community, if you know I'm queer, you go, well, you get a half a check mark for a minority, not a full one, because you can pass. Well, I ain't passing for nothing, baby. Everybody sees me coming a mile away. Because I ain't got nothing to hide, and there ain't a closet big enough, strong enough, or mean enough to ever put me into. So, but it's different. And I don't try to take anybody else's experience, but I do resent people trying to take away my experience. So one of the reasons I want to talk about spiritual DNA is, if somebody is singing a song to you, whether that is a song of Judaism, or whether it is a song of Native American, or whether it's a song of the Philippines, if they sing the song and you go, oh my God, that really resonates, that's the song. Don't get the blindness. Even if you're a person of color, don't get white man blindness and thinking, hey, they don't look right to say that. Listen to what they say. Because I know some people that look right to say it, that say a bunch of shit that is clearly like, no, you actually, like, don't tell me that somehow this shaping of you that was horrible, but that happened multi-generational, didn't leave you with an imprint where you're actually speaking totally opposite from the culture that you're now claiming you're coming from. And I've seen this. It's really horrible. It's especially pertinent to the trans community, because all of the ancient cultural religions honored trans people, thought that they were religious or that they were spiritual beings. There were separate places for them. They were seen as being able to be healers of the male and the female. And I see this again and again and again in religions. And then I see people coming and saying, well, we're not going to allow, trans people. They're just wrong on our reservation. Well, you know what? Your ancestors are rolling over in their grave because they looked at these as truly unique people to look up and hail. But you're preaching Christianity in a reservation where you're talking about, I'm teaching native ways. No, you're not. You're teaching homogenized, pasteurized ways. So to the people out there that are watching, I want you to know, first of all, in our spiritual DNA, we are all going to have lifetimes when we were extremely psychic and when lifetimes when we never accessed psychic abilities. It wasn't part of what we were here to do in this lifetime. There are people that come in that spend their whole life as psychic nulls, so to speak. And it's not that they don't have it. It's like they do not have a purpose for it in a lifetime. It isn't a matter of capacity. We're all born with the ability to be psychic because it's within our soul, within that cell in the body of God, to connect with everybody else, just like the root of the aspen tree connects to all the trees. But not all the trees need the same thing from the root, depending on where they are, on the side of the mountain, or are they by the river? And does the river flood? And maybe they don't need something that the trees that are tall up, that don't grow as tall because they're a little higher on the mountain, and this way the sun hits them in the wind, or they're in the shadows a lot of the time. They need to draw other things from the root to survive. So you may not be in a lifetime where drawing on your psychic abilities is part of the nutrients of where you need to, what you need to survive from where you're planted. The other thing is I really feel that spiritual DNA is trying to tear down the artificial walls. And it's really hard. We are at an extremely dangerous place in our country's history right now, where there is the question, will the haters win, who really want to keep separating us? And they fuel an angry, negative side of cultural appropriation while turning their back on it and then making horrendous, horrible comments about it, but yet say, hey, we recognize you. We recognize the fact we can take advantage of your culture, your background, your who are to rally that you need to hate them over there. The ones over there you need to hate. Hate them. I don't know really of any core spiritual, even religious belief that started out with, who can I hate? So in your spiritual DNA, you may be called to be something that does not ever call you, that your physical DNA never calls you to do. You may have talents. I love when I hear somebody who comes from a non-musical family, like they couldn't hit a note if you put it in the palm of their hand, and have no musical abilities. And then you see their 12-year-old child go on America's Got Talent or Britain's Got Talent, and they sing like they've been singing their whole life, and they have a beautiful voice and they have perfect pitch and all stuff. And they go, where did you come from? Was the Milkman musical? Because nobody in our family was, right? When we sing, the cats and dogs howl. And we know how dangerous that is, since, there are people out there looking to, have them for dinner, talking of absurdities. And so in this, if you are called to something, your spiritual DNA is just as valid, just as important, and needs to be understood and respected. It's not something, however, you're going to find on 23andMe, and you're not going to find it on Ancestry.com. But, as you do a deep and meaningful spiritual journey, I will guarantee you the people who can be your guides, the people that can light the flame to take you into the tunnel, will help you remember, recognize, claim, stand in the power of what your spiritual DNA came in here for you to do. So, on that note, I apologize. Losing my voice. Okay. So, everybody can come off mute, and I'm going to start. I don't have any questions right now. Ben, is there any questions on your timeline?
Nope.
Okay. So, Ben, we started with you. So, do you have additional comments you want to make? Questions you have for Raina or I, or other things you would like to share?
Sure. While Raina was speaking, I found some connections with, specifically with Kabbalah. I've studied it Golden Dawn style for 10 years with a Golden Dawn school, and but there's in that connection to the tree, that connection to where we come from, and how if you think of it in kind of a less multidimensional way, up here is where heaven is, and down below your feet is where earth is, and where it connects. But that's kind of a little kind of two-dimensional idea of it. But it's really, what came to mind specifically was in Neoplatonic philosophy, and specifically the path of theurgy, which is something that I practice as well, which is trance work and shifting of consciousness. And in that sort of with the ancient Greeks, there's this part in the Eleusinian Mysteries where they say that we are part God and part Titan, and there's this whole story there that is about basically us being that sort of bridge between the divine and the material, and us being that, like, we are participating in the chain or the tree or the path of the divine into the material world, and the gods, or whatever it is for you, interact with the material world through us, and we are the channel of that. So if you think about spiritual DNA in that sense, we all, in our DNA, in our makeup, are created as that pathway of the divine to interact with the material world, to create miracles, to create divinity, right? And so, if you ever wanted to look into the Eleusinian Mysteries, I've been, studying it kind of intensely, and it's kind of the background for a lot of spiritual thought in the world, and how it's kind of developed. And, and so that piece too is, everyone is that, to whatever degree they are meant to in that part of the world. Whatever, if you think about, you decided what you were going to do before you came here and what lessons you were supposed to do. You had this conversation with God of what your purpose was going to be, and living that out in the material world, you still are that, almost that that sort of connection. And when you make that connection, even if it's just for a millisecond, like a lightning bolt coming down from the divine to the earth, it passes through you, and you are made up to be that sort of channel and spiritual divine to whatever level you are, no matter what your ancestry is, what your lineage is, what you're meant to learn in this life. Everyone has that to a certain degree, depending on what they're meant to learn. Like you said, Kevin, when you're talking about that as well. So I wanted to also ask with Raina, with your connection to the Tree of Life and understanding it through a sort of a spiritual DNA, how does that resonate with you and your path?
Yeah, particularly with as you speak of this, weaving, or, well, that's the word that, how that comes to me for that description of beingness between heaven and material or, you know, spirit and material. What it calls within me is, you know, with the re-indigenizing path, and just getting more words around it in my path, more, you know, in the past decade, when I've first learned the term for the type of life path I was experiencing with these shamanic experiences, which is Babaylan. You know, when I first learned that term, it really helped ground me and turned me in, you know, towards, you know, decolonizing and decolonization and re-indigenization as a path, giving me words and meeting community around that, especially among my Kapwa, which is what we would call our, you know, shared inner self is what it means. It means cut from the same root as well, for our Filipino community. And dismantle some of these structures, you know, from the basically, I'll just say, whiteness culture, the modern Western mindset that separates us or drives dissociation from one's inner experience, right? And re-indigenizing has connected me to that. But, you know, since I was little, I've considered myself, you know, like, looking back, I see how I received no religious instruction, right? I just was open to spirit directing me, right? And so, like, I sometimes joke and say that I'm spiritually feral, right? That was my path, right, as this sort of left-hand wisdom path, crazy path. And so one of the things that we learned in our, you know, when I reconnected in my decolonizing Filipino community, we talk about this word wild, right, which has negative connotations in Western culture, right? However, for us, it just simply means in its natural state, right? And so it's like, was such a relief for me to be like grounding in human nature, right? And the other part that goes along with that is that there's no pre-colonial Filipino word, for the word spirituality, because it's inherently part of being human, right? So yes, we are made of spiritual material, right? It's not separate. And something else. Shoot, that's not coming to me right now. But does that answer your question?
Yes, and I think there was that sort of the connection to trees and how they're kind of a picture of connection to the divine and connection to the material world, connection
Right.
to family, and to connection to all those things. And, you know, using that word tree, and, you know, and like I come from you know, the Netherlands is mostly where my family is from, and you know, and practicing seed, which is kind of shamanic sort of practice. And I had that practice since, you know, I was very young. And I would, you know, I went to my first intertribal powwow when I was 9 years old, and found myself from that point going into the forest and singing in unknown words and languages, and things would come through me, and the connection to nature and the divine would come through. And, you know, and it felt natural to me in a certain way, you know, and that's kind of what's, you know, waking up within, you know, what you were speaking of. And also you, Kevin, when you're talking about, you know, the whiteness, but also having that sort of like deeper shamanic sort of soul kind of piece. And so that was before all of this Golden Dawn things that I've studied in school. That's what I started with, was that having that almost like this singing come out of me from somewhere unknown, but connected me to everything, and brought miracles and magic and spirituality within my life to a level that before I never even knew. Just hearing, and, you know, the drums and the native, that singing, you know, that woke up in me, that singing. And even though I'm, 99% white at the, in a sense too. So, and so I think there's a piece when Kevin, specifically when you're talking about the the whiteness, but then having that sort of, had the white blindness people talk about. Even when you say that to me, some part of me goes, ooh, white blindness. Ooh, what this uncomfortable in my body, but at the same time, there's that energy there when it comes to that, where like, if you close your eyes and you don't see the face that it's coming through, how to, and for you being indigenous, specifically, I think what that brought up for me too was that sort of, being native and experiencing the, the colonization and all of the things that came from your ancestry and the things that, the colonizers have done, to the United States specifically, even, there's a piece there where, how does that translate for you into what he's saying, where it comes to, the white blindness that he speaks of? Like, how does that, how do you see that in the way that like Kevin would say that?
So I am going to say we are sitting on a question that came in right after I asked Benjamin to speak. And I've been sitting here going, okay, I kind of want this to wrap up. I'm not.
No,
shut up, Ben. Shut up.
I do have some.
I understand.
So from Drek Rod, most of my life I've had signs and visions guiding me to a specific section of spirituality, but because I don't know how I could fully obtain those gifts or who to speak to, I doubt that this is something for me. If you feel connected to a certain field or type of spirituality, how do you know if it's really meant for your soul to experience it in this lifetime? What could you do to feel confident in the knowing? So I've had the most time sitting with the question, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it first and then pass it to you guys, because it's not so. I think as we used to say, in your heart of hearts, in your soul, in your knowing, when we are connected to something, when something is calling us, we have to figure out how to answer the call. And that's part of where it comes into how I see the world and how the world works. Is opportunities will show up and they may cause us to need to take risks. We need to put ourselves out to say, I'm called to this. And of course, in the, at this day and age, there's almost nothing you can't find on Google. Now, it may not be right, but at least it's a place where you can start to find out some things and find out who's around or who is it or what book has been written or what YouTube video has been done. And the funny thing is, sometimes it can actually prove to you how connected you are. And if you are comfortable in sharing what the spirituality is, please do so. You've got 3 people here who are not unfamiliar with multiple kinds of spirituality. So we may actually have, but if you're not comfortable mentioning it, you don't have to. That's fine. But I would say, if it's calling your name, you need to answer. It knows your name. It's calling you. And then it's just a matter of, and I say to people, it will show up. Somebody will show up, an opportunity. You showed up at tonight's event. If you share the spirituality, or if you're not comfortable sharing it on this format, I'm sure any one of us would be more than happy to, like answer an email or whatever. I mean, they can tell me when I let them talk that, no, don't contact me. I have no use to speak to you. For which they'll never be invited back to another sip again. But just ask, just be in child curiosity with it. Just keep opening yourself up, try meditating about it, see what comes. And one of the fascinating things that may actually confirm it is you may run across a book or an article or a blog or a YouTube video or something and watch it on the spirituality and go, oh, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't sound right. Like I'm not. But if that part of you inside goes, yeah, well, that's because they're screwing it up and that's really not what it is. Listen to that as well. Just because it's on YouTube does not mean it's true. Just because it's on Google does not mean it has value. We've all learned that lesson at this point in our evolution with all of this stuff. So I do want to say that, and I am going to make one comment about something that Benjamin said, where it sounds like we might have a little different point of view. And again, that's great because there's no right or wrong here. There are just multiple perspectives. So Benjamin, when you were talking, you talked about when you go to God for your purpose. And I always look at it as God does not establish our purpose. In fact, what God does is show up after we've established our purpose to support it. I believe in a universe that conspires to help us. I think when we start to say, well, I think that there is a human pothole when we say, well, God told me that this is what I'm here to do. There might be a little interference, because I always look at that higher soul of saying, hey, this is what I've done. This is what I need to do. This is what I'd like to do. These are the things I'd like to maybe have another shot at, blah, 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 blah. To me, that energy we call God comes in to conspire to help us with what we decided to do. And I only wanted to point that out because I see people using God's purpose as a really insinuous way to avoid responsibility, or there's a whole list. But I just wanted to throw that out so I didn't forget. And that's my answer to Dreek. And again, hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. But also feel free to share the spirituality. Do either of you or both of you, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, please. Thanks. So what comes to me to address first is this last question. What could you do to feel confident in the knowing? And so for me, what comes up is allow yourself to be in the unknowing, right? And it can be associated with that curiosity and play that Kevin was talking about, that sort of childlike curiosity. But how could you become comfortable with not knowing? And this will be walking the mystery. And in being in that unknowing place where, we're releasing tension, right? Oh, I gotta know the answer, right? Well, how about allowing the unknowing if you're not really sure, right? Allow the unknowing and see what naturally emerges from your body, soul's and natural intelligence. That's one way. And the other thing now, so how do you know if it's really meant for your soul to experience this lifetime? And so it's like, the more one way to know is the more you put it aside or ignore the calling, the louder it will get in your experience, and the louder it will just keep showing up the more it's ignored, because it's just something that your soul is calling for you. If it is meant for you, it will just get louder and louder until you start to address with your attention with intention, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Cool.
Benjamin.
Okay. What I would say is definitely do your research. I mean, definitely study, but study in a way that's not like, oh, this thing says this book says this, that means it's true. But how does it resonate with you when you read it, when you experience it? Gather information and knowledge, but also take that time, what feels right to you, and let that lead you. Create experiences with these things. Try some of the things out. I mean, it's not like, I wouldn't say go grab a Ouija board and a black candle and just see what happens. Go ahead, but that might be a little bit of a harder lesson maybe for some people, right? But what I would say is like set up experiences, because really when you're experiencing the pieces of that path, or when you're doing things that are interacting with your senses. That's when things come through, and the way that they feel and the way they experience changes you or shifts you or shows you things. That's what's going to lead you. What did you feel? What did you experience in these things that you create and do? And that's where you're going to know whether it's right for you. That's when you're going to know which way to go, or even if what you're doing is what you want, is by experiencing it. And so creating that in a playful and curious way is really, I would say, the best option. So.
One of the things I heard all of us recommend to you in various languaging was innocence, curiosity, this release of having to do it in a way that proves something to the world. And children have this wonderful curiosity and naivete that really allows them to like ask questions and to just like experience and try to figure things out. And we get a lot of that bullied out of us. And yet, that's when we are learning the most, growing the most, that gathering. And it's got to be done with, like a clean slate when it's in an area. Now, you didn't say anything about the religion or spirituality you were brought up with. So, I'm moving a little away from your exact comment here. But the other thing is, I have heard more times than I can count somebody say, at a very young age, I knew I was in the wrong church. I was in the wrong religion. Like my parents would make me go, and I would be crying. I would be, the whatever, whether it's the priest, minister, rabbi, what, and it doesn't make any difference. I'm not picking on any one religion, but it was scary to me. It was just scary. Like I just, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. And the right spirituality, and I'm going to say religion depends. Some religions definitely are more imbibed with a spirituality that is more welcoming and less doctrine, dictate, and creed. That if you've never felt at home with whatever you were exposed to, I mean, we can't all be raised feral like Raina was. Spiritually feral is that put all that aside. Say, hey, it was a book. I read it. Didn't really, I don't want to see the sequel. I don't need to go back and read it again. It just didn't speak to me. But don't let it color what your experience is if it doesn't resonate to you, because you are supposed to, or you have to, or you've got some very dominant people trying to force you to. So those would be some of my kind of wrap up. Anything either one of you want to say about this question before we move on? Okay. Benjamin, I started with you to poke around to see if you have any questions or thoughts. And of course, it's been leading to some conversation. So I'm now going to toss the ball to Raina.
Hi there. So, before you had Treat come in with his question, or their question, sorry. Benjamin, you had a question that you started to, I feel like I had a response to that, but I just want to check in.
I think it was kind of the other perspective. So
like, Kevin, how did it sit with me?
Yeah, well, yeah, because Kevin's perspective of how he spoke about that experience of basically, being white, but then having that natural ability and connection to something beyond that. And the terminology and things he used, for example. And I guess the question was more like, how is it kind of like from someone who is, is native by birth, what is that perspective for you, right? When it comes to what he was talking about.
So first, I'll just say I'm not native, descended from native, but Filipino culture, peoples. And the other thing I just want to mention, because I heard like a little bit of like discomfort come up, and I'm just like, I just want to point out that the decolonizing process, it's inherently uncomfortable, right? And so this is for everybody. I mean, this modern Western sort of whiteness centered culture that's detached from our wildness, basically, our nature, our human nature, and drives dissociation from our human nature and connection to our embodied and somatic knowings or indigenous knowings. And so, coming into dismantling those where the culture is to keep things homogenous, basically, and don't rock the boat. It is really necessarily disruptive in order to evolve and heal past that. And also, I heard in Kevin's journey that he is re-indigenizing in a grounded way. He's in collaborative, nurturing relationship with peoples of different cultures, right? Especially the one that was coming and pouring through his soul or his body. The spirit DNA is a counterpart to our genetic DNA, right? And so, on the one hand, there's two ways I understand indigeneity, right? Is one, if you're born on this earth, you come from a land, so we're all indigenous. But there's, at the same time, there is this construct from a dominating whiteness culture that does not want to look at itself and the harms that were caused, right? But still persist, even in the denial of it. And it does not acknowledge the harms that were caused and endured by peoples, right? Who were displaced, basically, and had their cultures erased, right? And so creating relationship with people, I think, is where it's all at. Like in our indigenous nature and our human nature, we are meant to connect with each other, right? But Western modern culture is all about hyper individualism, and what do I get out of it? I'm going to go into this space and conquer it, right? But we're in all this together, right? And really in our natural state where we have relational neurobiology, like we're even cellularly, biologically made to connect, right? And this is just how we're all connected to each other. I could sit here and I would consider you my Kapwa as well. It's just not Filipinos that I would call that. It's anyone who's connecting with me, right? And nurturing collaborative relationship that acknowledges each other, even in conflict. We're able to still stay in connection with each other, right? And it's not about denying others' experiences and having one win out over it. It's about creating that win-win, So I feel a pause here. So I think that's where I'll keep it right for right now, if that makes sense.
One of the things for me, because I'm Unitarian Universalist, and I'm multi-generational Unitarian Universalist, and we have our stuff like everybody has their stuff, but where we are, as far as quote unquote major religions, I would say the number one most socially justice oriented. And we do a lot as a community and in our sermons and in our churches and in our groups to to challenge the both white fragility and white supremacy, which are two sides of the same coin. You know, and if you look at it, the white, quote unquote, the white culture got away for centuries by bullying everybody, women, anybody of any kind of difference, because it survived through a hierarchy of might makes right and conquering and things like this. And it was a way that went from how do I survive in a world that's gamed against me, where a lot of native cultures, more indigenous native cultures that were not white, found their path through having relationships with the animals, with nature, with the things, where it seems for whatever reason those that came down the white pathway um, felt like, well, I conquered nature. Well, no, you don't ever really conquer nature. I conquered, I mean, mother will slap you upside your head when you least expect it. But it was always like the challenge. But this whole thing came from being the smallest kid in the play yard, and instead of making friends, it just put on a lot of bravado and went and got whatever it needed so it could bully everybody else. And there's a bullying to the white mentality of this is what is success. And now we've created a world where a lot of the money and power on a surface level is being held by these people, and they know that it's slipping away. I mean, one of the reasons we are where we are in this country today is that there is this almost wounded animal survival type of feralness to, the white people in power, the Christian nationalism, all of that stuff. If I say anything that makes you uncomfortable, I invite you to invite me into conversation about it. But I look at this and I go, the dinosaur is dying and it's fighting for its life, and it's vicious. I mean, I'm going to share this. I heard this today because there's this, the latest lie, and literally on national TV, JD Vance said, well, even if I make something up, it doesn't make any difference if it's going to help show the suffering that people are going through. Well, yeah, it makes a lot of difference. I mean, the poor Haitians in this town in Ohio that are getting bomb scares and threats and stuff because you made something up, not because it showed suffering, but because you could take advantage of people that are afraid that they're being replaced. And it's going to turn to hate to everybody who doesn't look like them. And yet I know people that just that are just like, well, that's just the way they are, and it doesn't make a difference. It does, it hugely does. But when that bullying mentality, and you've always been at the top of the pile, even if your pile was smaller than somebody else's pile, you don't have the same experience. And so for those that are out there, trying to figure out these things, there are communities, there are churches, there are actions, no matter whether you are red, white, brown, purple. I like something in a light forest green with purple stripes, maybe. Uh, whatever it is, there are communities that are unifying. And the power of a lot of the indigenous cultures for a long time was they played fair in a way, in an odd way, like nature does, because they had a romance of being in love with the earth and being in love with the rhythm and figuring out and creating relationships and stuff like this. and we're totally unprepared for the completely amoral, vicious attacks that the hey, I'm going to be the bully on the playground that came at them. So you may be drawn to some of these communities, even if you do come from the bully lineage. You may come from you may be very drawn because your spiritual DNA is going, that was you. You were on the wrong side of that bullying many lifetimes. You took the sword instead of the conversion. And so now you have more power when you push back because you're one of them in appearances. And it makes a difference. Allies make a difference. Any closing thoughts? We're coming to the close of this. We have no more comments coming up. Hopefully our comment was helpful to our viewer, and maybe one of us will hear from them if they would like more information. Ben, I'm going to start with you. Any closing thoughts before we end this show?
No, I just think that is kind of the biggest kind of theme in a more general way is if you talk about like your material lineage and your spiritual lineage intertwining, even just doing this with your hands, right? This is what's happening to everyone all the time, right? You're having that weaving that's happening between, your physical experience and your spiritual experience because they're happening at the same time. And so both are important and in everybody's life and everybody's, everything that they're experiencing is that weaving of both, and some of us, like the people on this panel and many others, work on that weaving for a living, for part of their purpose. And I would say all three of us are those people. And so I would say, yeah, reach out to anybody you feel, could help you with that sort of weaving. I want to just thank the other panelists for their, openness and connection tonight as well.
Miss Raina, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I really appreciated dropping in with you both on this and how the conversation unfolded and flowed, and I guess for closing thoughts, what comes to me is just encouraging more and more, creating reconnection to your inner landscape, your body, your somatic wisdom, right, in order to reveal pathways to understanding, your spiritual path. I mean, this is it. Your personhood is the portal for connecting, and not only with self, but with others, community, nature, spirit. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank both of you for joining it. It's been a completely lovely experience. If you enjoyed SIP, know that our next ship is SIP, Spiritual Interactive Panel, and the ship will sail on 10/20/24 at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Patty Anastasia, Louis Grazi, Raina Wilson, and at the helm, Kevin Ross Emery. Right? Is my white privilege showing as I, claim the helm position? Join us then. Know that if you go to the facebook.com/New Hampshire Metaphysical, or you go to the Kevin Ross Emery YouTube, all of our old SIPs are housed. This will be housed. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, everybody, for coming.